Jim Varney, quite possibly one of the most beloved entertainers in history, was indeed a man of many talents. But given the fact that his work as Ernest P. Worrell was so memorable and impactful, it's easy to view him as a one-trick pony. And that was something that Jim Varney was never completely able to outrun. Ernest was a big deal. There was a time when he was technically a Disney character. But Jim Varney was capable of so much more, and he would prove this on a regular basis. Unfortunately, it would seem that the world would never really notice. He would star in a multitude of films, every single one of which would display his acting ability, even though some of those movies could be described as not so good. But that's really all subjective, and one man's trash is another man's taxi driver, and Jim Varney, no matter how bad the movie was, always gave a splendid performance. As it's been well established throughout the course of the world, Jim Varney is best known for portraying Ernest P. Worrell, a family-friendly character. But what's interesting is that most of Jim Varney's non-Ernest work is anything but family-friendly. A good example of this would be the film Fast Food, which was released in theaters April 28, 1989. And this film is on the milder side of 80s raunch comedies, and it certainly deserves that PG-13 rating. And this would cause a bit of a stink, all because Jim Varney was in it. This was 1989, when the Ernest P. Worrell's character's popularity was in full swing. And of course, Ernest was most popular with kids, and once kids found out that Jim Varney, the man behind Ernest, was in a movie, they wanted to go see it. And this would only piss parents off, because they didn't want their kids to watch this movie due to the rating. Even though there is sort of a Porky's vibe to this movie, it's not that bad. It's not exactly appropriate for kids, but kids could watch it if they could sit through it. The thing is, it's a little boring. Now, of course, Jim Varney is in it, but not for very long, and he certainly is the highlight of the movie. So if you went to go see this thinking it was an Ernest movie, or that Jim Varney was in it for more than 15 minutes total, you were going to be mistaken. Because even though they used him to sell this movie pretty hard, he's barely in it. And he is the main reason why anybody went to go see this film, and he's still the main reason why people watch it today. Of course, it doesn't hurt to have Tracy Lords in your movie, and they would use her to sell this as well. And much like Jim Varney, she isn't in this movie for very long either, but it will always be interesting that Tracy Lords and Jim Varney were in a movie together. Fast Food was Jim Varney's first non-Ernest cinematic role. Sure, you could count 1985's Dr. Otto and the Riddle of the Gloom Beam because he barely portrays Ernest in that film, but it's still in the Ernest universe. In fact, many people consider that film an Ernest movie, even though it's totally not. It's arguable, but it could be said that outside of Ernest, Dr. Otto is Jim Varney's best-known character. The very unique design and portrayal of this character led him to have some real estate in most of our memories. He certainly stands out, and though rather zany, Dr. Otto is the perfect supervillain, a mutated, mad, science-y type genius bent on world domination. And these character traits are best displayed in Dr. Otto and the Riddle of the Gloom Beam, which was released in theaters July 19th, 1985. And this not only would be Dr. Otto's big screen debut, but the Ernest P. Worrell characters as well, though he's not in the film very long. But despite this fact, they certainly used it to promote this movie. Hey, you use what you got, and at the time, nobody knew who Dr. Otto was, but they were very much aware of Ernest. So Ernest isn't in this for very long. But Jim Varney certainly makes up for that by portraying a litany of other characters, including the debut of one of his other famous characters, Auntie Nelda. This movie is a testament to the acting skills of Jim Varney, skills that were often underrated. And though this movie is a great showcase of his ability, that's really about it. This movie was absolutely, utterly, and totally despised by critics and basically anyone who went to go see it. It's since gained cult acclaim, certainly amongst Jim Varney fans, and is regarded as one of the greatest B-movies. But those accolades took a little while to achieve, and doesn't change the fact that this movie is still dog shit. Yeah, it's one of those things where your memory is better than reality, because if you watch this again, you're more than likely not going to enjoy it if you ever did. Just the mere fact that this movie even exists is really good enough, and it's satisfactory without watching it, because the concept is pretty great. It is what it is. It is a perfect B movie. All in all, this movie is pretty demented, with a lot of bizarre and strange imagery that was pretty unsettling for kids. And kids, of course, wanted to go see this because of Ernest. Marketing throughout the mid-80s was a pretty strange thing. Hell, there was a talking Freddy Krueger doll that really should not have existed. After Fast fast food, Jim Varney would spend the next few years focusing on Ernest in cinema, with the release of Ernest Goes to Jail in 1990 and the release of Ernest Scared Stupid in 1991. And let's go back to Ernest Goes to Jail real quick, and obviously you can't talk about Varney's villainous roles without talking about Nash, who of course is the main antagonist in Ernest Goes to Jail and quite possibly one of Varney's most memorable villains. Sure, Dr. Otto would have to be on the top of the list of Varney's the most memorable villain he's portrayed, but Nash is something different because Dr. Otto was more whimsical and comic booky, and though he was dangerous, he was more comedic than he was really a serious villain. Nash, however, was not comedic in the slightest. He was more like a crime boss, almost like a gangster, and Varney portrayed this character straight up deadpan. The character was certainly a presented threat, and it proved to all of us that Varney could be pretty intimidating if he wanted to be. And Nash probably is the best example of Varney's acting ability because really all Varney had to do for this role was take his hat off. The rest is all Varney. There were no special effects. It was all Varney's acting. And of course the gimmick of Ernest Goes to Jail is that Nash looks exactly like Ernest. But what's strange is that the longer the film goes on, the less he looks like Ernest because Varney's portrayal is just so different. It's a pretty intense performance for such a whimsical movie, and it's strange that this kind of movie would have such a serious villain. In fact, to me, it seems like Nash could easily be a villain in one of the Die Hard movies. Nash was an excellent character, a great villain, and a splendid performance by Varney, but Varney would not be done showing us his acting chops just yet. In 1993, Jim Varney would expand his horizon and appear in a very unexpected place with the film Wilder Napalm. And if you haven't seen this movie, and I'm guessing you haven't because it is sort of a forgotten about film, you should check it out. It's very interesting. It's a bit of a romantic comedy with some family-oriented subplots, and oh yeah, the main characters are pyrokinetic. That's right, they can start fires with their minds. It's a detail that's just sort of slipped in there, and the movie plays out in such a way you're totally cool with it. Other than that, and without giving too much of the film away, it does have to do with a traveling circus, and there's a pretty sinister-looking clown. And it should be known that Jim Varney is in this, but he's far from the main character, so don't expect to see a lot of him. He has a very different look in this film. He looks like a character in Pit Fighter or someone who would fix your transmission but only accepts cash. Why we don't hear more about this film, I'll never know. Jim Varney will always be associated with comedic performances, basically because of Ernest, and most of the other work he's done is in the comedy genre. But every now and again, he would portray a role that would prove he could be the exact opposite. Yes, even though he's known for being lovable and funny, he could be as sinister and sleazy as they get. A good example of this would be 1995's The Expert, wherein Varney portrays an underground arms dealer named Snake. And he's not exactly a sinister and sleazy bad guy, but he is pretty greasy. And it is definitely a character we're not used to seeing Jim Varney portray. And that's pretty much it, really. This film's pretty flat and sort of plays out like a made-for-TV movie, even though it isn't. Certainly not my favorite film, and if I never see it again, I'm okay with that. In fact, I regret watching it at all. Yeah, even Jim Varney can't do much for this film. It's just not good. Jim Varney's work in this film sort of took everyone by surprise because we just weren't used to seeing him like that. But in 1997, we will be given a portrayal by Jim Varney that the world would never be ready for, with the film 100 Proof. In this charming little movie, Jim Varney portrays an incestuous father who pimps out his daughter. And let me tell you, as you can imagine, this is hard to watch. Not just because of that, and thankfully Varney's not in it for very long because you really don't want to see him. It's also just a really depressing movie. Yeah, it's one of those Sundancey, my life is so horrible independent films that you hear so much about. It's not a bad movie, it'll just really bring you down. You might as well wash your car in the rain while listening to Sinead O'Connor. And it's a Jim Varney role that you really just don't want to see. He's a total greasy creep in this, and it's unlike anything you've ever seen him in. But it is a testament to his acting ability. But how about silly martial arts comedies? And that's what we would get in 1998 with Three Ninjas, High Noon at Mega Mountain. This film does have its share of critics, and rightfully so, but say what you want about this movie, it does have a very interesting cast. Besides Jim Varney, it also stars Lonnie Anderson, Victor Wong, and Hulk Hogan? Yes, Jim Varney and Hulk Hogan were in a movie together that's so surreal to me, it almost seems like a weird dream. So not only is this another Jim Varney movie, it's also another Hulk Hogan movie. This film is generally regarded as being terrible, but I don't think that's very fair, because it is a kids movie. It was made for kids, and it plays out exactly like that. Of course, adults aren't going to like it. I don't think it's right to critique something that's not for your demographic. Sure, there's kids movies out there that that adults like too, but this isn't one of them. What's interesting about this film is that Varney plays a villain, and he would portray villains here and there throughout his career, pretty much proving that he could do anything. In this film, he portrays Lothar Zogg. Hey, wait a minute. Isn't that the name of James Earl Jones' character in Dr. Strangelove? I wonder what's going on there. Anyways, portraying a villain in a kids movie was certainly not beyond Jim Varney's ability. And we would see this happen again in 1999 with Treehouse Hostage. And this is another kids movie that's regarded as terrible and overly criticized for no apparent reason. And it is pretty bad, but again, it wasn't made for my demographic. It was made for kids, so some concessions should be made. And this does have a surprisingly complex story. Varney doesn't exactly play the villain, but he is a criminal. So he's a villain, sort of. I don't know, you'd have to watch it. And as lighthearted as this movie is, there is an underlying sadness about it. Because not only is this one of the last on-screen appearances for Jim Varney, it was also when he was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. Not that there's ever a good time to get that kind of news, but could you imagine getting that diagnosis while working on this kind of a movie? That had to be pretty bizarre. And though no one would have blamed him for not finishing this cinematic masterpiece, he did because he was a pro. Treehouse Hostage might seem like it was a direct-to-video movie. It did get a theatrical release. But of course it was released on VHS later on in 1999 by Trimark Home Video. And this really isn't all that common, and the prices are pretty mid-tier. But that sort of is to be expected, being that this was one of Jim Varney's final movies, so there certainly is a collector's market there. And that really is the only novelty of this film, though be it a sad one. 1999 wouldn't be all bad for Jim Varney. Well, I guess that's really a manner of speaking, because earlier in 1999, we would see the release of Existo, the Forbidden Movie. This would have a very limited theatrical release in June of that year, and then would go on to be known as one of the worst movies ever made. But I'm quite certain that was entirely intentional, because hey, it's in the name, for heaven's sakes. The Forbidden Movie, it tells you right away that you probably shouldn't watch this. To put it politely, it's a very interesting film. It's a musical comedy about this bizarre magician, and Jim Varney's in it for a little bit in probably one of the strangest roles he's ever portrayed. This movie is foul, absurd, and very crude, and I really wouldn't recommend watching it. However, if you're feeling adventurous, go ahead and crank it up. But I can tell you right now, you're gonna hate it, so don't say I didn't warn you. Yes, it's an intentionally terrible movie, but it does have some rather interesting tidbits about it. For example, this was written and directed by Coke Sams, the man who wrote and directed most of the Ernest movies. In fact, this movie was worked on by the same production team, including the actors, as the Ernest movies. Yes, if you have seen the Ernest film series, and I know you have, then you'll notice a lot of familiar faces, like Gaylord Sertan, Jackie Welch, and of course Jim Varney, but also Bruce Arnston. And he actually portrayed the original Existo the Magician on the Hey Vern, It's Ernest television show. That's quite a switch, and of course the film has nothing to do with that. It is interesting that this film is Coke Sams and the Ernest production team's last hurrah together, and it's also interesting that this film was released smack dab in between Three Ninjas, High Noon at Mega Mountain, and Treehouse Hostage. What can I say? Jim Varney had a very versatile career.